Dude, you are getting well. Dude.
I love your intro. It's so great.
Thanks, dude.
Especially the little ding in the eyes. It's a nice touch.
Well, we try not to take ourselves too seriously around here, but it's, you know, it's part of our self-care here at Dude Nation. Thanks for being part of this, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
So if you're just listening live or listening on the podcast in the present moment, but in the future, if that makes sense, you're listening to Ben Curtis and Michael Schwengel, who is a actor, a performer, and a coach and a healer of sorts. Michael's mission and projects and work has really moved me, and we got connected through the amazing Janine Watkins out of Minnesota, I believe. And like me, Michael's also a voiceover actor, so you'll hopefully enjoy his soothing voice and his great audio today. Technology works, and we're going to learn a little bit about what makes Michael tick and some of the beautiful medicine that he has to share on his heart with each and every one of you today, including how to transform through suffering or despite your suffering. So this is great. Perfect for Dude, You're Getting Well. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah,
really?
It's been a good day. I'm doing well.
Okay, cool. Yep. So we have this question like a Dude Nation that I'm practicing. Like, how are you? Question mark. I mean, comma. Really?
Really? Yeah.
Question mark,
good.
You know?
Yeah, I think I woke up today feeling a little bit of like fuzziness in my mind. Oftentimes when I am presented with an opportunity to step more into my purpose, there's like I'll face some kind of like resistance, especially in the mind. And
I don't know anything about that.
No? Okay. Yeah. Always clear.
Look, a bird.
Yeah, so I've been having a little bit of that today, but I also was helping my friend that's opening a new business do some plant shopping today. So that was super delightful. I love buying plants with other people's money. It's fun.
That is really fun, actually, because sometimes you're buying plants, you're like, what? But when it's someone else's, it's great. What kind of plants were they?
Oh, it's like low light situation. So I do like dracaenas, like mother-in-law tongues. Let's see. ZZ plants, some of like the basic low maintenance, low light plants. Maybe.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any plants in your home?
I do. I have quite a few. I've got a big ficus elastica, so like a rubber tree.
Tight. Yeah, I'd say that
ficus elastica. So
ficus elastica.
Yep.
Oh, so we're learning a lot here today.
Rubber tree. I have
it's rubber tree.
Yep, rubber tree. Yeah. I've got Euphorbia trigona rubra, which is like it looks like a cactus. So just a succulent that has, it's like a cactus that has leaves on it. Got a philodendron. Yeah, a couple other ones.
I love that you actually can remember these names. Like, that's not a gift that was really natural for me. Is that one you've developed, or is that
I developed it for sure? Yeah, my ex was like a real plant freak, and so when I like kind of recreated my life here, I really appreciated having plants around, and I appreciated those a lot, like through our relationship, and so I've kind of developed more of a knack for it and challenged myself to know a little bit more about them. Besides,
that's great.
Alive.
Yeah, you never know what you're gonna get out of a relationship,
right? Yeah.
Apparently
a lot of suffering and some new knowledge.
Yeah. Well, apparently they say suffering's optional. We haven't figured that out fully yet, but we're on the path here.
Yeah.
You know, I saw this really cool series. If you haven't seen it, it's called The Future of ... I believe it's on Netflix. And it's the future of pets, the future of dating, the future of living, the future of plants. And the one on plants is especially fascinating. And one of the things I love is they're figuring out that even the DNA of plants, like the DNA of people, are just systems of numbers,
Mm.
kind of like blockchain. It's just, a bunch of numbers. And we can actually use those numbers to store data. So they're starting to see and predict that we may be replacing our hard drives, external hard drives, with plants at some,
Wow.
and that we can even grow plants rather than having to go to IKEA and spend all this money on, all this machinery and stuff that goes into making these fabricated, like, horrible pieces of crap.
Mm-hmm.
Actually just take this little seed and grow it, and it's already been, the DNA has been created such that it grows into a chair.
Really?
How cool.
That's
Yes,
cool.
really. And that they can also, plants can start to understand, I mean, they communicate with each other, right, through the
Right. Oh, for sure.
mycelium network.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just learned about that some maple trees are like the most, like, wicked, destructive. They, like, strangle each other to death and share
Mm.
things, but they also can be beautiful. But that they actually share nutrients. Sometimes if one tree's dying, they'll share them to another. And so plants have this intelligence that they're studying that actually can understand our pheromones, our levels of cortisol, like how much stress we're putting off, and create scent, smells, or natural lighting
Hmm.
to actually help soothe and comfort us as we go through the world. So I
Wow.
thought that was neat, like
That
how we
is
can
neat.
work with plants.
I'll check that out. That sounds great.
Yeah. I don't have nearly as many plants as you, but I thought, like, maybe you'll like this. Someone listening will learn about healing with plants because they make me happy when I see them. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward today.
Oh my God, they're like they're my roommates. I mean, they give me they're like, I really feel like I talk to them and I feel like they hold space for me,
Hmm.
and vice versa in a really beautiful way. I definitely, it definitely feels like there's a presence in my apartment with all of them there. And I will say that there's one I bought. It was a chestnut vine, I believe, that we did not get along. Like I was kind of like on the fence when I saw it at the store, and I brought it home, and it just like didn't seem like it energetically fit in with the rest of them. It had this kind of menacing energy,
Uh,
and it wasn't liking the space. We weren't liking each other, and it had to go at some point just because it was throwing the whole vibe off.
well, maybe you and the plant are both happier now that you've gone your
I
separate
think so.
ways.
Yeah, my friend has it now, and they seem to be getting along fine. So
Well, I didn't realize we'd get to talk about plants this much today, but I am digging this.
okay.
I have one more really short, fun story about this that relates to yours. Are
Mm-hmm.
you ready for it?
Of course.
All right, cool. And then we'll get deeper into the
Yeah. Right.
world
With
of
mycelium.
one Michael. Yeah. So I was talking to this this incredible human who's an accountant, and we started to realize, I was introduced to her through a healer, and as she understood that I was a healer and I was open to maybe some more interesting ideas, she was like, "Well, let me tell you about this plant that I had." I was doing this anatomy energy class with a mutual friend, and during that class, I noticed I had this plant that, like, every day I'd come home and it was on the floor, and it was just so, and I'd put it back up and make it nice. I'd come home and that one plant, like, all the other plants are fine, this one's on the floor. So she was like, I realized this plant was misbehaving. And out of this anatomy class, like, I realized there was something out of place with this plant. So I sat it down, I gave it a talking to, and then the next day she came home and all of the plants were on the ground. It's like one plant had communicated with all of them. They're all on the ground. So finally she took the plant and she was like, all right, I gave you a chance. Like, I set my boundary, and so now you've got to leave. And she left the plant. And, like, from then on, like, all of her plants have stayed up, and she's never dealt with it again. But she had this,
Boundaries
like,
are amazing.
unruly plant, which I thought was kind of wild,
I love that.
interesting. Yeah. And I loved that my accountant was willing to share that with me.
Mm-hmm. It's
I was
amazing.
like, you're hired.
Right. It's a good sign.
Yeah.
Major green flag.
So how did you
Yeah.
get into the world of healing?
Oh
And
gosh.
before you answer that, I
Mhm.
want to precursor this. Like you're not the first healer we've had on here. And some of us are former recovering drug addicts and alcoholics and
Mhm.
hooligans. So I haven't found many people have gotten through healing just because like they felt lovely and decided today I'm going to become a healer. But
Yeah.
I'm curious. So, you can let it rip here. You can
Sure, of
let it all
course.
out. Like what
Yeah.
what brought you in fact, what was your like I'm gonna make this even juicier.
Yeah.
A two-part question. What
Mhm.
was your dark night of the soul in your life?
Yeah.
And
Well,
how did that relate to you being a healer today?
yeah, I feel like I've had several of those, but,
Yeah, you're like,
um,
which one?
which one? Yeah.
Well, you can talk
Oh,
about as
let's
many
talk
as you
about
want.
I'll give you a yeah, I would say, like, mm, well, I'll just say what the most recent one was that really kinda was like the universal, 2 by 4 kick in the ass kind of dark night of the soul experience, which is that I went through a really tough breakup a little bit over a year ago, and I had been working informally as a healer for years and had been really interested on this path for years. But I got myself into a relationship that lasted about 4 years in which I really was neglecting my gifts and betraying my own truth in a lot of ways, and, I got myself into a relationship that, um allowed me to feel comfortable on one level because I was kind of hitching my wagon onto someone else's life path.
Mm,
But in the end of it, I very much was left feeling extremely depleted and, um, yeah, I would say like even suicidal on some level, where it was just like I like wanted out. Um, I felt so detached from my sense of purpose and self.
mm,
And, coming out of that experience and healing through it really put me in a position where it was like, I have to either like, now is the time to either really follow my calling or else I'll just continue suffering. And it was just
mm,
like it was a huge, huge wake up call for me to just take complete responsibility for my life and to stop waiting for someone else to give me permission to do and be who I truly am. So that's kind of like the most recent huge push that sent me into the direction that I'm on right now, um, in the ways that I'm bringing my gifts into the world as a healer. But I'll go backward then and say that, um, I growing up, I I've always been a very, very sensitive person, a highly sensitive person, and
mm.
really struggled
You're
with it
not
at a
alone.
young
Thank
yeah,
you for
right,
sharing that here.
right. Yeah, growing up, it was just, like, really, really tough for me. I didn't know, obviously, what that meant. I didn't know what being an empath was. I just felt everything, and I didn't know that when other people like, I took everything personally, and I felt like it was my responsibility to make everyone happy around me because frankly, like, I didn't feel well when other people weren't happy. And
Mm,
so, yeah, it was just like I was very much in this codependent dynamic of being in the world at a young age. Um, and as when I was very young, I felt like I was this like complete ball of light, really spontaneous, um, free spirit. I was very involved in music and acting and all this stuff. Like I was very much in my flow at a young age. But then when I got into my teens, especially struggling with my sexual identity, I really started to have a lot of anxiety and panic disorder, and I didn't have a lot of guidance at the time to really understand, you know, my sexual orientation, nor being a highly sensitive person. And it just drove me into this place of shame where I felt like there was something fundamentally wrong with me.
mm,
And I've carried that wound with me for a lot of my life.
mm,
And then it really wasn't until I'll kind of fast forward a little bit. When I was 24, that I met m my healer, Jake, and I went there because I was struggling with, um, a lot of anxiety, other physical symptoms, um, panic attacks, and also at the time, I had gone back in the closet after coming out. I was
Mm.
just coming out of an experience where I was in Los Angeles and, had another, like, dark night of the soul experience where I kind of, a very, like, cliche type of Hollywood experience that I think, many people can relate to that have lived out there. But,
I have too, so
yeah.
we can tell it if you want, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
got
yeah,
it
no, I just
written
I got into, like, a relationship with a manager, that was really toxic and unhealthy, and I was at an age where I didn't really know my own self-worth. I didn't understand the importance or value of setting boundaries because
down.
I didn't understand my own value,
Mhm.
and, yeah, that was another kind of, iteration of this same sort of, mythology of giving away my power to someone else, and when I left that experience in my early 20s, I really thought it had to do with me being gay, and I was also at a place in my life where I didn't have, like, a deeper connection to a sense of self, and I really felt like I was chasing after this external image of success and fame, and I just wanted so badly for other people to tell me um, that I was worthy, and it put me into situations where, I was compromised.
Hmm.
And so coming out of that experience, and wanting to connect to spirituality, I first connected to my religious upbringing and, started reading books about ex-gay therapy and, connected with a ex-gay ministry in Minnesota. And so when I moved back, um, to Minnesota at that time, I basically came back here as, as a straight man and was, like, trying to rebuild a life as a straight person. And, so I kind of created this whole new shell to put over myself, which, originally started as a desire to connect to my spirituality, but became a new mask, essentially,
Mm.
that ultimately had to be destroyed to allow me to connect to a real and, authentic experience of spirituality that was, um, that was, like, came from within.
Yeah. Well, thank you for walking us through that, and you said so many beautiful and poignant things. There's a couple things I wanted to touch on, and, you mentioned when you were young and, you're free and felt purposeful and lit up and belonging. And I think that's, unless we grew up in a highly abusive home or environment, that when we're young, I feel like it's pretty cool. Like we're doing great. And then we hit this age where we start to reflect. And in order to fit in or survive, especially teenage years, our identities, who knows where to start or how to actually find yourself. But it's all about that experimental phase. But I hear, experiencing that moment of anxiety and panic disorder, um like what I saw and was feeling in that moment is just that your like insides didn't match the outsides, that you didn't have a community that actually looked or felt like one that was embracing of where you were on your journey. And so anything other than what you see just was like, nope, you're messed up, sorry dude, you're
Mhm,
fundamentally wrong.
mhm. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely experienced bullying, at a certain point where it was like, outright signs of, you don't belong or, people kind of putting their labels on me. But there was also just, I think, this was like the larger story, I think, is just as someone that, has that intuitive, empathic connection. It's really difficult when you're basically kind of receiving information on a spectrum of life
Hmm.
that, like, a lot of other people don't have context for. And it's really confusing when you don't, like, you just don't understand why you're feeling, seeing, experiencing so much, and you don't have role models or a guidebook to understand like what that's all about.
Hmm.
It just puts you in a really confused and troubled state. And
Yeah,
yeah.
what would you say to anyone who's in that state right now? I mean, I know we've got a lot of now you open your phone to get validation and it's just more of looking different or trying to conform or having the right kind of body or filler or,
Mhm.
fake or real, whatever. Like what do you say to anyone who may be in that place right now?
Yeah, I mean, well, ultimately all of that's just an illusion, you know, like anytime you're picking up on any external signals that society is presenting around like people trying to um experience a level of security and safety through image or any kind of like external projection like that, and you're picking up on it and you're trying to take it in, it's basically like you're going the opposite direction toward what you're really wanting to experience, which is something deep within yourself. And so, I mean, I notice this when I use social media because I can just kind of tell um, when I start to kind of go out of my body, which is
Hmm.
what it oftentimes feels like, you know, like kind of gravitating toward those external images. And when the ego gets attached to seeking some sort of safety through that, you basically kind of go out of your body and you
Hmm.
become kind of, you know, identified in this like just realm of illusion.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing for me that I really learned is to just deeply listen and trust to the wisdom within oneself.
Hmm.
And it just, you know, it can't fail you. And I think that the more and more that you do that, you will then align with other people who are doing something similar, and it will continue to reinforce that pattern of finding acceptance and healing from within.
Hmm.
Anything other than that, you know, anytime we're trying to seek something on the outside that can only be sought inside is where we're led into addiction because we're trying to experience some kind of nurturing in a place that isn't able to feed us. And
Yeah.
so it's bound to leave us in this cycle where it's like we want to get the need met, but we can't. And we want to get the need, but we can't. So we keep going back to it and back to it and back to it because we think that's the only option. And there's only one way to like escape that, which is to like have a deeper experience of oneself where you open up to um understand like how to actually get those needs met.
Yeah. Yeah, and what a journey that might be.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I
For
just
your whole life.
yeah, I mean, there's several men who I help who, who have coached through those spaces of addiction where, whether it's porn or just scrolling on their phones like that, it serves something, but it just ultimately has them feeling worse and worse and worse because it never actually fulfills that need.
Right.
So I think you really spoke to something there. And but I'm curious, you mentioned a time when you had come out, you had embraced your sexuality and what was your truth at that time. What had you and you were going through sounds like kind of a crisis of identifying yourself or finding belonging or feeling, healthy. What had you what had you shift your mindset and decide, oh, I'm now this, or put on that mask of actually I'm heterosexual? Like what had you give up that truth for you?
Yeah. I would say that, I mean, when I first came out, it seemed like um my spirituality and my sexuality were at odds.
Hmm.
And I longed so much for being able to connect to my bodily experience and the needs that I have as a human being and to live my truth in that way, that I at first feel like I kind of disconnected from any sort of idea of spirituality. I would say that I most likely just became agnostic, or I just didn't really have any sort of interest in God, spirituality, anything like that. It was like
Mm,
I'm gonna live as who I am now,
mm,
and in that process, I started receiving a lot of external validation as I entered the gay community, and I just became kind of high on it. It was like finally I have all these people that are showing me attention and validation, and it was like I belong somewhere. I
mm,
belong, I belong, I belong. And I worked at a gay bar for a while, which was fun. And then I got into modeling, and I signed an agreement with a manager in London, and I got sent to New York, and then Miami and LA. And in that experience, it was wonderful on one level because I got to escape a lot of the anxiety that I was feeling at college and in places that I didn't feel like I belonged. And I got to kind of like get ejected out into this whole different stratosphere where I could kind of, live on a completely different level. But it also put me in a position where, because I didn't have a support system going into that, moving to New York, for example, I didn't know anyone there, and so I was at the mercy of the guidance that I was receiving from my manager and the agents and whatnot. And long story short, I kept getting put into situations where, I had to compromise my own integrity in order
mm.
to do the work. Like I would, you know, photographers that would get quite handsy with me, and or other things that would happen, and I would just kind of freeze up and oftentimes just let it happen because it was like, well, I don't this I don't know the what the rules of the game are, and I'm also like out here all alone, and you don't even really have an opportunity sometimes to rationalize those things in the moment. You just kind of like go into a freezing pattern, and they just,
Yeah.
so that sort of thing happened quite a bit. And by the time that I was in Los Angeles, I got probably deeper into that type of world, I'll say, and
Mm,
was working with someone that ran a gay porn company, and I was helping assist in some of like the production aspects of that. So I just got very much entrenched in that whole experience, which seemed to obviously be all about objectification and a lot of manipulation, and you know being valued for something other than who I really was. And so it was my experience of going through all of that, which felt like, again, kind of the pendulum swinging to this one side away from spirituality, to be able to accept my identity as a gay man, that took me into a side of the gay experience, which is obviously not the entire thing by any means, but it took me
mm.
into a side of it that was kind of an extreme, and that led me away from my own truth on another level. So it was the act of recalibrating my compass, swinging the pendulum to the complete other direction where I wanted to connect to my spirituality again, leave the whole gay identity behind, because at that point I didn't have a larger perspective to see all of the amazing healthy things that come with being a gay person. And
Mm,
so I course corrected and went the other direction. And then eventually, when I met my healer, Jake, after I was going through some of the conversion therapy groups and things like that, it was the experience of being with my healer that it was like, oh, I don't have to like pick these two sides.
mm.
And it was by just trusting that internal compass that allowed me to over time bring that pendulum back to center, where it was like, I'm able to be a spiritual being and I'm able to be a body at the same time. And in fact, it's that beautiful intersection of the two that
Mm.
makes this like lovely human experience. And my ability to hang on to both at the same time is like, that's the greatest gift. Um
I
and
love
the
that you're
process.
talking about this. Yeah, thank you, Michael. What a gift. Um, I believe that a higher power brought us together in a certain way. And as you're speaking, I'm, this conversation certain evolving into really beautiful place of sexuality and spirituality, and where the two can come together. And my father was born in the 1930s in Western Tennessee on the Arkansas border near Memphis. And he was always attracted to men, and he really didn't feel permission for that. And he was also attracted to women, but mostly men. And he became a minister. He loved God, loves God, married a woman. And then about around age 50, he started to realize a part of himself, which he'd really suppressed, was actually eating him alive. And as he started to come truth with that, he told me, and he passed away a couple of years ago. But I had this, like, thank God, I had this moment where I decided just to ask him, like, his life story and what it's been like being a gay man growing up in the South, like, back then. And so, yeah, he became one of the first ministers to come out in the Southern Diocese to be openly gay. And it was such a moving thing to watch my father go through that and kind of the blowback of it. But he said, I just realized, like, if God is said to be a loving God and is hanging out with prostitutes and the beggars, like, he's friends with the gays too. He loves us all. And when he finally got that maybe he could be loved and serve God, like, there was this whole new freedom. And the Episcopal Church became one of the first denominations in Christianity to accept all people and welcome them to be baptized. And I thought it was just a beautiful thing as I watched my own father go through this very kind of thing you're talking about. Because I used to say, this is confusing, Dad. It seems like you're choosing this. And he was like, I would never choose to be gay. The amount of suffering and abuse I went through, I wouldn't put that on anyone. And he said, but this is really my truth. And so that's when I was like, oh, people aren't just born with this. Yeah. It's not just something, the opposite. People don't just make this up one day. Right. Like, this man actively tried to suppress and embrace, and he actually put himself through therapy to try to nurture his heterosexual side. And then there's an incredible man I met in New York whose name is escaping me, but he's actively worked to ban conversion therapy in all 50 states.
Yeah.
And he was Jewish, still is, but put through conversion therapy. And it's actually become, I think he's made some progress. There's already a handful of states at least have started to do that. But it's interesting, being from Tennessee, I'm now watching also some states swing, the other way. And even in Tennessee, they say, listen, we're built on top of all kinds of crap and past and horror, and we're a big Frankenstein. But if we learn how to put all those pieces together, it actually becomes this beautiful living being. And so that's sort of what I was seeing as you were speaking about how to, like, put all those pieces together, and actually they create this beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I also wanted to just say that, like, I really believe that it was my coming out process that actually allowed me to have a deep, sincere, and, like, truthful spiritual process. Like, I think that growing up, while I did obviously feel an affinity towards something spiritual, it was also kind of theoretical, because, again, it was like I couldn't fully embody it, because if I fully embodied it, it would mean I would have to go into the places in myself that I experienced a lot of judgment and shame. And so I really feel like, for me, that, yeah, it was my coming out process, and learning to accept myself fully and embrace, and like, I can't imagine not being gay. I think it's amazing and wonderful, and I love that it's given me permission to, because it puts you in a position at a young age where you don't really fit in the mold of society, in some ways, and it forces you to create a life for yourself that is not confined to the expectations of others on some
Mm,
level. So you
mm,
kind of go through that process, that training ground, like, really early on,
mm,
and, which is a really important spiritual and personal development lesson to go through. And
mm.
so I mean, at this point, like, I'm so glad that I'm gay. I would, I just can't imagine any other way, like, for this lifetime.
Mm.
It was definitely one of the greatest gifts, and it's allowed me to, have, um, just levels of empathy and connection with people that, I personally wouldn't have if I hadn't gone through that experience.
Wow. Thank you for saying that. That's really beautiful to hear. And I'm really grateful for your voice and your perspective and your message and that you own who you are. Um, one of the things that inspired me, just like your website alone, is onemichael.com, right?
Mhm.
Like that's beautiful. Because I used to say all the time to everyone, like all the time, like, how do I be these multiple people? How do I be an actor and a musician? Like my bandmates used to be like, you got to choose, dude. You got to choose. And my agents were like, you got to choose. You got to choose,
Mhm.
Ben. And I was thinking, like, fuck that. Like, I'm an artistic being. I don't fit in a box. And even as I befriended more and more gay men in college, I realized like my sexuality was more fluid than I was allowing it. And I felt way more freed up inside of some spaces where there was permission to be something else. And I realized, oh, I just lived in the South. Like I was just trying to like survive, and even now being a coach, I had a huge fear of that. Like not being taken seriously as an artist or vice versa, like, oh yeah, Bruce Willis has a band, but it's like
Mm.
we'll never take his band as seriously as his acting career. Or there's a couple different actors that have bands, and some of them have been really successful, but it's and then I just realized all that was made up, that programming. And I looked at your site and it was One Michael, and it talks about healing and your process. And then also you have this amazing like voiceover reels. And I mean, you're in the studio now. The booth is
Yeah,
gorgeous.
thank you.
But I love, I'm really hearing the possibility of being yourself in this, and what freedom comes from really owning all parts.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's been such a lifelong journey to learn to kind of compile all those together. It's kind of in the same way where I was talking about before, like, there's this, like, maybe you can relate to this, but just on some level, there can be this story when you're a sensitive being of like, do I belong in the world? Do I belong in the world?
mm,
Do I belong in the world? And when you find yourself in certain communities where an aspect of yourself belongs, as an actor, as a healer, as a coach, you can start to like gravitate toward the collective thinking of that one kind of entity, which can then become suffocating. Like, for
mm,
me, it was
mhm,
suffocating to completely it was suffocating for me on one level to, identify myself only through being a gay man, or only through being a model, or only through um, well, even, yeah, in voiceovers too. It's like it to just, like, pigeonhole myself into one thing and be a that. It's like, well, actually, I'm an expansive spiritual being that transcends space and time, that's inhabiting this, like, meat suit that is expressing itself through different creative endeavors. That's, like, actually what I am. So how do
mm,
how do I how do I make space for that in the world? Um, and yeah, so when I originally, um, created the One Michael name and website, I think back in 2016, it was where I was really starting to kind of experiment with, like, how do I just kind of it was more for myself, like, how can I just create an energetic container where I can kind of put, like, where can I, rather than, like, waiting for the world to give me a container that I can fit into, which it can't. It can't, because, like, the world doesn't know all of who I am. Everyone has an individual experience. So, like, how can I create a container for me that supports all of my different parts to come alive and feel supported and loved, so that I can be, as much as possible, the totality of who I am and show up authentically. And
woo!
yeah.
That's hot. That's hot. Reading for the world. How can I create a container for me? I think that's a quote I'm going to take from this. Listen, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to give you some laser questions.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
mentioned like I've got my healer for people who are like, what's that? Like your
Mhm.
healer? Like, is this your guru? Can you explain like you know when you say like I've got my healer, like what does that mean to you, and what does a healer mean to you? We've thrown that term around a little bit. We've used it like I've used it for myself, for you. How do you describe a healer, and who's your healer? What does that mean
Sure.
for you?
Yeah, and I will just say that I have, like, lots of different healers that I go to, but I've got one in particular that's really, served as a solid mentor role for me, in particular as, a healer in a specific modality that I'm practicing today for the past decade. He's been that role for me, and, so he practices a form of energy healing work called, Caritas technique, which evolved from a practice that he learned called reconnective therapy. And gosh, the best way that I could describe it in a nutshell is that, I mean, the role that he plays for me is really to hold space for me to grow into more of who I really am. And in a specific session with him, he does that by staying so committed to energetically stay in his truth, such
Hmm.
that through resonance, it allows me to do the same thing. So rather than him going in and trying to like fix little pieces of my life or experience, he's basically holding so strong in the knowing that in this present moment, all is well. And that,
Hmm.
the experiences that we have of suffering are very real and deserve empathy. But there is an experience of self that transcends all of that. And so I think that through, whatever discipline that a healer is working, they're ultimately kind of tapping into that universal presence of the present moment and offering it for the person. So I, that's what I receive when I work with any healer, but in particular this one that comes to mind. Like that's kind of the relationship between the two of us, is him holding that presence for me, and then also stepping in as a guide and intuitively sharing his own wisdom and life experience that can help me on my journey, but always in a way where it's like, I don't know the answers for you. I can reveal to you information that comes from my own experience, but it's ultimately up to you to create your own map of reality that works for you. And so I've worked with a lot of different mentors and teachers, and the ones that I feel like have been able to stick along the longest are the ones that don't get their egos attached to my process and journey, and allow me to unfold on my own terms.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. Hmm. That is really good wisdom right here. I'm capturing some of what you said, and that you get to do it on your own terms. Like, what if, I love that you've created a healer, not as someone who, like, I have the answer, you're healed, but that
Mm-mm.
they hold space for you, and allow you to discover it for yourself. I think that's a great distinction of a wonderful coach. I remember kind of early in my coaching career, I had an opportunity to get hired as a coach in the company that trained me. And I was so excited and honored. And I was like, I'm a shoe in. I'm going to fucking nail this. And like at the end, the guy said, I actually don't think you're a great fit for this program. And I'm like, what? And I asked for some feedback. And he said, yeah, when I ask you questions about other people, like how you might work with them, you actually just spend a lot of time talking about yourself. You didn't actually say like what you do to hold space for them. Um, and you just told me about your credentials. And I was like, oh, I was confused. I thought this was like an interview. I didn't realize like you wanted me to coach you. And I made it like I made him wrong actually for not understanding like the question or whatever. But I realized this was like an old voice talking. And all there was to do is just receive the feedback. Like, Yeah. I just need to be out there with him. So it's a great reminder, even in this moment. I'm like, am I out here with you? I know a lot of us like take this and apply it to ourselves, but I really appreciate, this concept of holding it for everyone, and that you said that for this healer. And so you've talked about the caritas.
Mm-hmm.
Caritas? Did I
Yeah,
say it correctly?
Caritas. Yep. Yeah.
Caritas.
Yep.
You said it here, and that's a really important part of your technique. I've come to learn. It's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things you practice. Can you tell us a little bit about, the Caritas technique and why you love it and how you use it today?
Yeah, yeah. So Jake, my mentor, developed Caritas about, I think, 2012, and started practicing it with me. And um, what it looks like is basically, and I'll just kind of like switch this around and maybe to the present day, what it looks like when I practice with people today. So basically, what happened was that after working with Jake for years, I came to have this understanding that I was ready to start practicing with other people. And then I started to have more formal guidance from him on how to make sure that I was doing with integrity. But what it actually looks like is kind of a combination of talk therapy meets somatic awareness and energy healing. So a person will come to me and they'll describe something in their life experience that is causing them suffering, or something that they want to transform to feel more alive and healthy. And so we'll start by just having a conversation. So typically in a session, I'm just listening for the first maybe 20, 30 minutes, and I might be taking notes. I'm just really getting a full lay of the land of what their experience is like. So let's say someone might come in and say that, I noticed that when I go into these like Zoom conferences, there's a part of me that just can't stop talking. Like I kind of like go into this automatic place where I can't help myself. I just keep talking and talking and talking.
Mm,
And so and they'll share that experience, and then I'll just kind of ask maybe like, can you share any other places where that shows up in your life? And I'll just kind of take some notes around where this energetic pattern is showing up in their world. And then once we get that established, sometimes I'll also get visions and symbols that I'll see that I'll relay back to the person, just so we can kind of like, it helps to sort of massage and create a little bit of space to ready for a deeper healing experience. And then what we do is we notice where somatically the experience around that is showing up. And so what I would ask that person in that particular example is, um, I like this exercise. What if that program around like, needing to kind of talk compulsively when you go into this Zoom meeting, what if we were just to experiment with it? Remember, there's like no shame around this. What if we were to experiment with it as if it's a program that's running in your consciousness, and we minimize that program just to experiment with like having that minimized and that program turned off? What does it feel like to be you in your body? And then we get to really see what's beneath it. And we
mm,
noticed somatically where it's showing up. It's like a fluttering in the stomach or the chest. And we sit in that. And then I have the person sit there, and we do what's called a round of Caritas, where I go into a space within myself where I'm being incredibly present with how I am experiencing the present moment somatically. It brings me into my own alignment. And we sit for a period of time until I get a nudge to come back. And I check in with the person, and I see what's transformed. And typically there's been like movement somatically, also new awareness. Intellectually, there'll be visions that they typically get. We start talking about those, and we just keep following this process until it gets to the end of the session, which could be, hour and a half, 3 hours. But it basically starts to kind of loosen the ego's grip on reality, reestablish a connection between the intellectual mind and the embodied sense. And there's just like this flow that typically arrives by the end of a session, where it's like buzzing and clear. And, oftentimes the problems that at the beginning of the session look like either A or B, neither one of those are the option. It's like a middle path, or a new solution where a higher level of consciousness can step in to solve the problem, provide new awareness, from a completely different vantage point. And only
that's
that can only
beautiful.
happen when the ego is able to like loosen its grip, but the ego can only do that when you offer an experience that'll, makes it feel safe.
Hmm. I really appreciate that awareness. And I know that, people listening to that may feel like that's intellectual or that sounds that way. It did for me for a second. But then if you actually separate yourself from it, it's like, oh, we're just taking a step back. We're just allowing ourselves to get unattached for a moment and listen.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. Do you have 2 more minutes?
Yeah, no, I'm good for time. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I know it's like I am very intellectual, like, in the way that I talk about it. It's like it's truly the experience of it is like it goes beyond the intellect. It's like
Well, you're
yeah.
speaking about it because we're on a podcast
Right,
right
right,
now, and
right.
it does help to see your hands, but at the same time, you're explaining it in a very simple way. So I just
Okay.
for anyone who, like, tries to take that and make it mean something, I just want to
Yeah.
remind us, like, "Oh, it's just this," right? Like, you
Mhm.
do a beautiful way of talking about it.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, it
No, I
really
mean
speaks to me. That's why I'm having all these visions because it's you. I'm seeing it as you're speaking about it. It's really clear. Like, it sounds beautiful, and that there's a meditative practice and very much being in the present moment and listening.
mhm.
Um, and it reminds me a bit of some theta healing work I've done.
Mm.
That was some healing modality I've been certified and trained in. It's listening for and being with, and through guided meditation and holding space and energy and listening in the body and like trusting your own inner healer and guidance. And I love that there is a technique that someone's devoted their life to and trained you in, and that you've gotten steeped in and shared with people that is
Yeah.
this technique. So that's really cool.
Well, I'm obsessed with it because it just when I'm doing the work with other people, there is nothing I would rather be doing in my life than being in a Caritas session with someone. It is
Mm,
just so profound, and it makes me feel the most connected to my true self when I'm in it. Because I have to in order to facilitate the work with someone else, I have to be in a place that is my most true self.
mm.
And so it's always a healing experience for me as well. I
Yeah.
get healed through the experience.
What a gift. Win-win.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great. And why do anything else if you're not enjoying your life?
Yeah.
Um, well, if there was one, well, let's say this here. I'm going to take you on the final questions I ask all of my guests here.
Okay.
If your life were a Hollywood film up until this moment, what would the title of this film be?
Oh my gosh. That's so hard.
What's the first thing that comes to your head?
Well, something about sensitive. Um,
That's title works. Something
Something about
about
sensitive.
sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the whole my whole kind of life saga has been about just, like about, like, giving myself away to and learning to heal from that trauma.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think all the highly sensitive people out there will understand that one. If you don't, it's okay. Got more questions. So, in this movie of something about sensitive,
Yeah.
who would play your parents? You could cast anyone.
My parents. Oh my gosh. I'm so bad at, like, picking out celebrities.
Let's say today you're
Um,
great and you could hire anyone. They don't have
yeah,
to be a
yeah, yeah, yeah,
celebrity
yeah,
or even an
yeah,
actor. You
yeah.
literally could
Who
cast
would
anyone
be
in the
my
world as your
parents?
parents.
Um, my dad, maybe Tom Hanks,
All right.
and my mom. Oh my gosh.
I mean, you could have gay dads. Could be
Yeah,
anyone.
yeah, there we go. How about Jennifer Coolidge? Just because I love her. My mom's not anything like her, but
I would
I
pay to
just love
see
I just love
Tom
Jennifer Coolidge.
Hanks and
Yeah,
Jennifer
right? Right.
Coolidge play your parents in
I
a
would love
movie.
that. That'd be so
That sounds like a
great.
great time.
Yeah, yeah.
Be nice and awkward, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
And if your ex was to name this movie, what might they
Oh my
title this
gosh.
film?
Well, at the time of the breakup, probably, like, emotionally volatile.
Great. Yeah. I can relate to that one too. That's funny. Um, and do you have any like secret talents that maybe we don't know? I mean, you're in a
Oh.
voiceover booth. We've mentioned that some. You're like really good,
Well,
voiceover
I'm like a real tech guru. I mean, I ran 2 web development companies and used to be a software developer.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so that's maybe a secret talent that I don't talk about too much anymore. But yeah, I mean, when I was in high school, I built software for a company. That was my first job. I built an order management system that ran the whole company. So that was like,
Wow.
um, yeah, I kind of have. I'm not a developer so much anymore. I used to just, most recently I've like ran companies that have managed dev teams, but I do come from that background.
How do you feel about AI today? Are you
You know
excited
what?
about it or
Mm,
like, oh my God?
I have been like super against it.
Hmm.
Well, philosophically, I just have a lot of issues with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of it kind of like taking an aggregate of like human experience and contribution and like allowing anybody to benefit from that, and profit off of it, and the way that it can like, contribute to, yeah, what scares me about it is just that it like, the people that already have a lot are going to be able to benefit more from it, and the ones that do not are going to be, get pushed down further. So I hate that
Mm,
about it for sure.
mm,
But I'm also at a place now where like as I'm growing my business as a healer, I I'm exploring ways to use, for example, Chat GPT to, um, just to like learn how to better, reach a larger amount of people and how to do it authentically, which means that I'm not going to use some kind of like language learning model to create content around authenticity, obviously, because that completely is hypocritical. But to like utilize the tools for good, I'm exploring where that might be possible. I don't know the answers yet, but I feel like there's going to be some fine line because I found that in my own life, if I push something away that I have a lot of emotion around, it might be preventing me from actually, um, stepping in to use something for good. Whereas, like, if I just stay back and kind of like feel like a curmudgeon around it, like I'm not actually benefiting anyone because it
mm.
causes me to disengage from the world. So it's
Yeah.
a complicated answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. And you said disengage from the world, but I'm thinking digitally. Yeah. And also, like, maybe we'll all just get to sit down and be together.
Yeah,
Like, that's what
maybe.
I'm
Yeah,
hoping. We
sure, that
just
could
hang
happen.
out while it does all the hard work for us, you know?
Yeah. So you sound like you have a more positive,
I've been
uh
working on it. I have
yeah.
existential crises about it daily,
Oh,
but,
yeah.
I've
Good.
been working with it and trying to see, like, the good side of this because some of it terrifies me, so,
Well, yeah, as a
it's
voice
just like
actor, it's like, "Oh, cool. You wanna hire me to build a model of myself so that you never have to hire me again. Great."
yeah. Well, if I can have, like, rights to that and use it for all my
Right.
websites, that could be
There
really
you go.
cool, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, how can it benefit us? But, yeah, it's gonna be interesting, and I'm really grateful on that note to all the actors who are and artists who are striking on our behalf. I'm
Mhm.
also on strike for all my union work. I was able to do one thing legally, while on strike, but it's, okay, I just got the call. I gotta go in a second.
Okay.
But just want to honor that. And as us as
Yeah,
artists here, like thank you for the work that you do. And
too.
yeah, I really appreciate that. And everyone who's been listening, whether you're listening live, if you haven't subscribed already to the podcast, please do so right here so you can be the first one to hear all these tips, tools, and beautiful medicine from the hearts of humans like this wonderful Michael we have here today. Also, Michael, where can people get hold of you what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, the easiest would be my website, onemichael.com, and I'm
Okay.
also on Instagram. It's number 1, Michael.
That's pretty easy to
Yeah,
remember. That's
yeah. Yep,
awesome.
yep.
And Michael, if you could give the world one gift today, what
Mm,
would you give us?
mhm. I would just say that trust your embodied wisdom. I mean, that is the key. Give yourself an opportunity today to just be with yourself and listen to what your body wants to tell you, because it's always communicating with us. And when we open up that channel of communication, really powerful stuff can come through.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. And, if we were all trusting our wisdom and our communication, what do you see us all doing?
We create new molds for ourselves that allow us to stop forcing molds on other people. When we all really honor our own truth, we stop participating in a way of being with other people where we force them to be something other than who they are. And that allows for true collaboration and abundance to take place. I think my favorite definition of love is I want for you what you want for you. And I would love to live in a world that we all can embody that type of love.
Well, I'm really moved by that. Thank you for that. I think that's a great place to leave it here. And thank you for your time today, Michael, and for everyone who's listening. Yeah, it's been really grateful.
I'm so honored to be here and really grateful for all the work you do. Thank you.
It's an honor. It really is. And so if you're listening, please feel free to follow us. You can reach Michael there at onemichael.com. And, go take care of yourself today. If you're listening, if there's something that inspired you, apply it to your life. Comment, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Any feedback on this website. And thank you for being part of the Dude Nation, the healing, the medicine in the world. We're really grateful. Michael, I hope you have a beautiful day, and everyone for listening. I'll see you same time, same place.